What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel, and today we're talking some college football DFS. Quick little three-gamer ahead of Week 5. This is the Thursday slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks. They have a first match deposit bonus up to $100 where you're taking advantage of everything player props. They have college football. We cover those. I do a video myself every Friday. And we have player projections over on Stochastic. You can use those directly to leverage against these player props provided by Prize Picks. And better yet, it's not just the first match deposit bonus. As you can see on the banner below, you'll get 1 free month of Odd Chopper, which you can use to help you with all things college football betting. And it's not just college football. NBA is coming back. We have NFL. MLB is about to hit the postseason. They have niche sports, tons of things you can take advantage of over on Prize Picks. Make sure to check them out. The link is in the video description below. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 to play. All right, let's dive in. We have a 3-game slate. I'll bring you behind the glass. We'll kick things off. This is a fun 3-gamer. I'm really excited for it. And I love covering teams that aren't normally on the main slate. So we've got Middle Tennessee taking on Western Kentucky, 60-point total and 5.5-point spread in favor of the Hilltoppers. On the Middle Tennessee State side, we've got, we have 2 teams that are pass heavy and play with some pace. Middle Tennessee is 54th in pace, pass about 55.5% of the time. Nick Vattiato is the signal caller here. He's averaging 36 attempts per game, averaging about 227 yards, so not quite the most efficient signal caller, but he has good mobility. He already has 133 rushing yards on the year. They'll use him on designed attempts, at least 5 over the last 3 games for Vattiato. This is a pretty solid player here. The only reason I would hesitate to use him is a certain Austin Reed on the other side is only 400 more. We'll get to him in a bit. But right away, I think Vattiato is going to be somebody for you GPP players to take advantage of leverage-wise. I also just don't hate a pure game stack. Use both Vattiato and Reed in the same lineup. These are both pretty highly projected plays here. The backfield, not really too much to get into. What I like most is the price point on Jaden Creedle and Frank Peasant. $4,800 for Creedle and $5,400 for Peasant. FanDuel, they're kind of flipped. Creedle is $75,000, Peasant is $6,000. They're basically in a 50-50 timeshare. Peasant has been injured, so I think maybe once he's healthier, he played last week, but he's banged up. Maybe once we get him closer to full health, he'll go ahead of Creedle again, but I think that's reflected in price with Peasant being a little more expensive. On FanDuel, Peasant is just straight up the better value. I like using both these guys for tournaments because of the timeshare and because you are going to get some leverage. Most people, I don't think, are going to play this backfield. Jakyle Middlebrook will play a little bit here, but he's a pretty distant third behind Creedle and Peasant. In the receiving game, they're going to run 4 wide with Middle Tennessee State most of the time. Jeremy Tate technically is a tight end, but he plays out wide a ton. He also missed last game. So when they didn't have Jeremy Tate, it was like full on 4 wide receiver sets. Just watch his status. Haven't seen an update on Jeremy Tate yet. So he's pretty big injury to monitor. Otherwise, their number 1 receiver is Elijah Metcalf. Nothing really to see here. 90% of the routes 2 weeks ago, 94% last week. Leads the team in targets by a pretty wide margin. He's the only guy with a double-digit target share. 13 targets last week for Metcalf. I think he's completely fine. Beyond him, you do have a bit of a wide receiver rotation. I like Holden Willis the second most. 67% of the routes last week. That was ahead of DJ Anglin Chisholm, who was at 43%. Targets also reflected this. Holden Willis had 10. Anglin Chisholm was at just 1. I would rank those 2 as wide receiver 2 and 3 in the offense, followed by Justin Olsen as the wide receiver 4, 49% of the routes. Then we go down to Javonte Sherman, 47% of the routes, and Kalani Norris, he comes in last week at 53%. As you can see, it's a pretty nasty rotation once you get behind Metcalf, and he's not expensive enough where I'm trying to avoid him. I'll focus on Metcalf for cash games and even in GPPs. Beyond that, I think we're just mixing and matching the rest of these guys, and I'll defer to their target numbers with Willis second, England Chisholm third, Justin Olsen and Javonte Sherman 4 and 5, followed by Kalani Norris 6. Going to the Western Kentucky side, already highlighted this a little bit, but I think Austin Reed is the best quarterback play on the slate. It's not a tight slate in terms of pricing, so 8,800 is not hard to. It's not hard to play him. It's also not hard to play him and Vadiato in the same lineup. Reed is at a pretty difficult schedule. They played Troy last week, Ohio State the week before. He's averaging 40 attempts, 267 yards, and he runs a little bit, 44 rushing yards. You look last year, this guy had over 200 yards rushing. He averaged 339 passing yards per game. He backdoors his way to 300 yards a lot because Western Kentucky 47th in pace, 66% pass rate running that air raid. He's just the safest play. The offense will get him there more times than Vadiato's will. So I'll defer to Austin Reed if you're playing just one of these guys. Again, I think you can play them both. The backfield, Marquise Stepp missed last game. This is a nasty rotation for Western Kentucky. You will see Davion Irving Poindexter, Elijah Young, LT Sanders. They're all involved. Not to mention they give receivers a carry here and there. Even if Stepp returns, I don't have a ton of interest. None of these guys is even averaging 30 rushing yards per game. So I would rather play Kretl or Peasant for GPPs on the Middle Tennessee side. The best thing I can say is they should all provide a lot of leverage. And if Stepp is out, you'd have more interest here. For the receivers, everything starts with Malachi Corley. He should be in most lineups, tournament or otherwise. 13 targets 2 weeks ago, 15 targets last week. He missed the second most recent game. Corley is the best receiver play on the slate. Beyond him, you will have to watch injuries, and this is going to be tough. There's not great reporting on Western Kentucky. Last game, Blue Smith didn't play. Dalvin Smith hasn't played in 2 games. We haven't seen Jimmy Holiday recently. Musa Berry got hurt. Trevor Borland, the tight end, is injured. A lot of guys that could potentially come back. Ranking them based on what we saw recently, it's very easy to say Malachi Corley is the one. From there, I think we're going to see, I don't even feel confident about this, but I would rank Katie Hutchinson and Craig Burt 2 and 3. Very little separating them. Craig Burt had 5 targets last week. Katie Hutchinson had 4. Both of their route rates were around 90%. Eric Messer at 5,600. He had more targets than both of those guys at 7, but his route rate was just 66%. So there's a little bit of volatility here. If we see Blue Smith or Dalvin Smith return, I think those guys would probably jump the players I just mentioned. You have to go all the way back to week 1 to see them playing together. But in that week, Dalvin Smith had 67% of the routes, as did Blue Smith. That was higher than Eric Messer and Katie Hutchinson. This is very difficult to parse. I think for tournaments, if we got news that Blue Smith or Dalvin Smith returned, we would fire them up for GPPs. But to sum this all up, Corley's clearly 1. Number 2 and 3, I would rank Burt and Hutchinson. 4, Messer. And then your GPPs, if active, would be Blue Smith, Dalvin Smith. Maybe Jimmy Holiday, I think, is pretty far behind them, but maybe he's worth mentioning too. Second game, Temple takes on Tulsa, 3.5-point spread in favor of Tulsa, 55 total here. Sneaky good game environment. I think less people will play this game, which has me very intrigued for tournaments. I like EJ Warner. He's not a mobile signal caller, but he is averaging 39.5 attempts per game. And Temple's had a pretty hard run out. They played Miami last week. They rank 20th in pace, and they have a 68% pass rate, so very much air raid. Warner is going to backdoor his way to some 300-yard games. I would still rank him behind Vadiato and Reed, but for tournaments, he does offer you salary relief if you're struggling with that. You shouldn't be. There aren't really any restrictions on this slate. The backfield's a committee 3 ways. Generally, if EJ Wilson gets involved too, this could extend to 4. Joquez Smith is leading a committee that also features Edward Sadie and Darvon Hubbard. Not a ton of interest for me. We'll get into the elite running back plays in a little bit. I don't think these guys are anything more than tournament darts. Among the wide receivers, Dante Wright is questionable. He's the wide receiver 1 when healthy, so a very important player to monitor here. Would love to play Dante Wright if he's questionable. All reports seem to indicate he'll be back. Just make sure here, this is a guy that has 27 targets through 3 games. Very, very good play. Without him, potentially we'll see more targets for Ahmad Anderson and Zay Baines. Even if Dante Wright returns, these guys have been very involved. Ahmad Anderson is averaging 8.5 targets per game. Zay Baines is averaging 7. And again, Wright's only missed 1 game. So Baines hasn't seen any fewer than 6 targets in any game this year. It's a really good floor for a guy who's 3,600. I think we can play Baines pretty easily, even if Wright comes back. I don't have any issues with that. And I'm going to be playing a lot of these Temple receivers and trying to mix and match them just because of the offense. And I think a lot of people will focus their attention on Western Kentucky. Without Wright last week, we saw a pretty nasty timeshare among the rest of the pass catchers. And one thing they actually did was move to some 12 personnel. David Martin Robinson leads that, but even Jordan Smith popped up for a 44% route share. I found that interesting. They didn't just go to another wide receiver. Even Xavier Irvin had a 33% route share. So I don't think there's a receiver that directly benefits from from Dante Wright's injury. I think this gets spread between tight ends and then some of the ancillary receivers like John Adams. And again, those tight ends are playing a ton without Dante Wright. Anyway, David Martin Robinson plays almost every single snap, so he's a guy we should mention as well in the same conversation as Baines. I'd just rather play Baines because the targets are much better and he's cheaper. Going to the Tulsa side, a team that was forced to change their offense because Braylon Braxton got hurt pretty early on. So they've actually been really run heavy, 39.5% pass rate. They're so fast, 43 in terms of pace, and they're favored here. Braxton allegedly could return. He's 8K. He has more mobility than either Roman Fuller or Cardell Williams. So I think for GPPs, he would be live if he's active. But I really do think Cardell Williams starts this game again. He has not been great. And I think this team does continue to lean on the run with Cardell Williams in the game. So I think he's pretty far behind the other quarterbacks we've mentioned. And I think he even ranks behind Jackson State signal caller Logan Smothers. I would rank him 5th on the list of quarterbacks I'm willing to target on this slate. And Braxton honestly would enter that picture as well just because of the injury he'll be coming back from. Backfield is very interesting. I think Anthony Watkins is going to be among the most owned backs on this slate, if not the most owned. They use a timeshare to begin the year, but Watkins handled 23 carries last week, and he saw 1 target in the pass game. But there's not another pass-catching back on the roster. They don't use one of these guys as the pure pass-catching back. Watkins' route rate jumped to 42% last week. They threw their chips in on Watkins, and in competitive games, I don't see this changing drastically. Jordan Ford, Bill Jackson, and Taj Gary should be change of pace options. The only real concern here is if Temple gets out to a lead, what happens to this carry share? Tentatively focusing on Watkins here, but there is some volatility. We have seen this at timeshare previously this year, so just keep that in the back of your mind. If you really want to get contrarian, Taj Gary, Jordan Ford, Bill Jackson, those are all guys you can look at. I would prefer Jordan Ford if playing a different Tulsa back. The receiving game, pretty clear here. 2 top guys, Marquise Shoulders, Devin Williams. Both of them will eclipse 90% of the routes in competitive games. Both of them have target shares north of 21.5%. It's just that the pass rate has dwindled with the offense changing under the new signal caller. So these aren't going to be preferred plays, but I do like using one of them. And I think in more competitive games, their route shares will be fine. The pass rate should rise. These are 2 pretty good plays. The wide receiver 3 is Camden Benjamin. His route rate jumped to 79% last week. That was pretty good. This team doesn't use a tight end on every one of their snaps, so you can certainly look to Camden Benjamin. Only other player to briefly mention here is Braylon Presley. He is listed as a running back, but he plays receiver. Don't be confused by that. His route rate has dwindled recently, 25% in each of the last 2 games, but he was at 63% in week 2. He's a pretty good transfer, so I think Braylon Presley is a guy to at least mention for tournaments. It's a short slate, so to get different, you're going to have to play some guys like this. I'm going to mix and match Presley in the flex. Final game here, we have Jacksonville State taking on Sam Houston, our 2 FBS newcomers. Jacksonville State is a 6.5-point favorite. The total is 36.5, so by far the worst total to target on the slate. But Jacksonville State plays hyper fast, 7th in pace, 33% pass rate here. Really interesting offense. Sam Houston's almost the opposite. 122nd in pace. They have a 49.5% pass rate, and they have been the worst offense in the country. That's not an exaggeration. They rank 133rd in efficiency. Going to Jacksonville State first. Logan Smothers took over for Zion Webb. Good decision. His passing efficiency has been far superior, even though he's not Patrick Mahomes out there by any means, but he does give them a boost in the pass game that Zion Webb just simply doesn't have in his game. And they don't have to change the offense a lot. Smothers is mobile. He had 21. That's not an exaggeration. 21 designed rush attempts last week. Holy smokes. This guy has one of the best rushing floors in college football outside of the service academies. I mean, he doesn't take a ton of sacks, partially by offensive design. And when he does throw, it's kind of just a little bonus here. I still rank him third because I don't see him being live for a 300-yard bonus through the air anytime soon. And Sam Houston State is a pretty decent defense. But man, this rushing floor with Smothers is very good. In the backfield, Ron Wiggins is out. That has consolidated opportunity to Malik Jackson. He's 5,900. He had 21 carries last week. And this guy is active in the pass game. Jackson has 11 targets over the last 2 games, participating in every route. He's the best running back play on the slate. The only thing that would throw a wrench into things is Anwar Lewis, who's not listed on your screen because he has yet to make his debut with Jacksonville State this year. Suffered an offseason injury. He's been practicing. He's been warming up. So this is a concern. Watch Anwar Lewis. I still think this is a committee, even if he returns. That makes Jackson still probably a top 3 running back play, even if Anwar Lewis comes back. But what this does potentially offer us is leverage with Lewis, who, again, I think people might just overlook because he has not debuted yet. The receiving game is typically not one I look to for Jacksonville State. These guys, none of them have more than 15 targets. None of them average more than 35 yards per game. That's Quinton Lane leading the bunch. But it's a short slate, so we'll dive into this. Quinton Lane is the wide receiver 1 to me. The routes have been volatile here, so don't just lock in like Quinton Lane or anything, but 90% of the routes last week, that led the team. He was at 70 the game prior. He's the most bankable. I think Sean Brown is the second most bankable. They're tight end, 90% of the routes last week. That was the only time this season he eclipsed 50%. So you can see the volatility coming right away here. 3, I would go to Perry Carter. He's been over 60% of the routes in the last 2 games. Sterling Galbon would be 3. He was at 81% week 1, and then he hasn't eclipsed 50 since then. And then last of all, I'll list Michael Pettaway. He's had a pretty good role, but it's also dwindled here in favor of guys like Quinton Lane. I don't have a good sense on what Jacksonville State is doing. It seems like they're kind of doing the hot hand at receiver. So I'll mix and match these guys based on price. If you force me to rank one guy number 1 based on their price adjusted projection, I would go with Sean Brown at 4K. But I don't feel good about this. As you can see, the route rates on the year for these guys, which average them out across games, you only have 2 guys above 60%. That's Quinton Lane and Michael Pettaway. Tough crowd here for Jacksonville State. These will be just GPP mix and matches for those of you playing multiple lineups. And finally, Sam Houston State, a team I could honestly see playing no players from. Grant Gunnell should be the signal caller. They benched Keegan Shoemaker. Gunnell started last week. He played terribly. And the efficiency stats are slightly better for Gunnell over Shoemaker. Neither of them run. Neither of them are good passers. Really slow offense. Jacksonville State's good against the pass. Really tough to see myself playing Gunnell. The backfield's a committee. Jack Hrebasek and John Gentry. Even Charles Crawford's got involved here. Tobias Weaver. You could see anywhere from 2 to 4 guys handle work. None of them average more than 26 yards per game. And honestly, like that Shoemaker on designed attempts, none of them actually average more than 15 yards per game. Unbelievable. I'll pass on the Sam Houston backs, even in tournaments. Receivers, very difficult. Ife Adeyi, he got hurt last game immediately. So when he's healthy, I think he's the wide receiver 1. I don't see us getting any news on this. Sam Houston doesn't have great reporting. They already lost their number 1 receiver this offseason, so losing him is pretty big for this Sam Houston team. Without him, Noah Smith, 65% of the routes. Malik Phillips, 62%. Alvante Woodard, 62%. Their tight end, Elijah Sohn, was at 69. This is a brutal pass-catching core. If you force me to pick one, I think I would look to Alvante Woodard at 3.6K. He only has 2 targets this year, but he's a Texas transfer. I think he's probably the most talented guy here. Otherwise, it would be Noah Smith at 42, and it gets very, very gross beyond that. Route rates all over the board for this team. It's very difficult to target anyone on Sam Houston right now. Even like Jay Rockwell or Shane Johnson, their route rates are so bad. So, I mean, this is a spot where I'm going to avoid, for the most part, looking to maybe some contrarian Noah Smith or Alvante Woodard, but tough team to target. That'll do it for us today. Thank you guys for watching 20 minutes on a 3-game slate featuring these teams. I appreciate you. If you have a comment, please leave it below. I'll try to get back to you. Or if you have a question, reach out to me on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. We'll be back breaking down all the games this weekend. So until next time, good luck, everyone. We'll see you then.